All right. So this is 210, and it says Unit 2 Summary. And it just recaps everything that we've learned. We had 9 different lessons, so we learned quite a bit. But we built upon what we learned in Unit 1. Unit 3 will use a lot of this stuff and start maybe making sense of why we're doing certain things, and also how to simplify our code, how to look at conditional statements, and we'll get into that in Unit 3. But Unit 2 Summary, just to recap, we talked about objects, and it says you learn to use objects, which are variables of a class that have been written for you in Java. You learn to use constructors and methods with and without parameters of objects, and built-in Java classes like string, integer, double, and math. Okay, these are built-in classes. We also learned how to create classes. We're going to do more of that later on, not this unit. Okay, some of our vocab words. We talked about class. It says class defines a new data type. It's a formal implementation or blueprint of the attributes and behaviors, okay, of the properties, of the methods of those objects in that class. Okay, by creating an object is a specific instance of a class. Okay, you can create many objects from a class. The class has defined attributes, and objects are declared as variables of a class type. Constructors are code that is used to create new objects and initialize objects' attributes. We worked with that for quite a while. And then also the new keyword, which allows us to create objects. Okay, and by doing that, we're able to call to one of the class's constructors. We mentioned instance variables, and instance variables define the attributes for objects. We talked about methods. Talked about the dot separator, parameters, as well as arguments. They are different. Okay, parameters are what is actually passed in once the arguments are already entered. Okay, so once the object is created, you pass in an argument. The method receives that argument and passes it in, where then the parameters that are expected are then observed. Okay, the dot separator is a way that we're able to use methods in an object. All right, and different return values. When you call a method, using the return keyword allows you to return a specific value. Knowing that strings are immutable in Java is important. You can't change the value of a string, but you can create a new string in order to store that value. All right. We also briefly talked about wrapper classes, and those classes create objects from primitive types, and the integer class and double class is what we specifically worked with. Okay, some of the syntax that we worked with as well. New and null. I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of the methods that we used length, substring, index of, equals, compare to. These are all methods that can be used in order to, that are already defined, that we can use in the Java programming language with our objects. Okay. It says we also talked about the min and max value from the integer class. We're able to use specific values and also use int value. Okay, and this returns the integer as an int. Okay, we talked about absolute value. We talked about how to create an exponent using the math class, and then also how to find random numbers. Okay, the formula that we use to use random numbers using the random method, Math.random, we signify that the range is the max number minus the min number plus 1. We just did that last lesson, and we did some calculations via that. So some vocab. Okay, we have the values or data passed to an object's method. we have a specific instance of a class with defined attributes. Code that is used to create new objects and initialize the object's attributes. Define the objects or functions for objects. Sorry, the behaviors or functions for objects. And then defines a new data type with instance variables and methods. Okay, so walking through these one by one, it says the values or data passed to an object's method. That's going to be parameters. A specific instance of a class with defined attributes. An instance of a class would be object. Code that is used to create new objects and initialize the object's attributes. Okay, create new objects. Code that is used to create new objects. Keyword new. Okay, that would be your constructor. Defines the behaviors or functions would be methods, and then defines a new data type with instance variables and methods would be the class. Okay, and if we run this, it says you are correct. All right, so object, class, constructors, methods, and parameters. All right, there are some flashcards, the Quizlet. If you wanted to go through there, you could use that if you really wanted to. Some common mistakes that maybe could happen in this lesson. We've talked about each of these, but if you forget to declare an object, forgetting to declare an object, call a method from main or from outside of the class. Okay, if you use object.method outside of the class, but you don't actually declare the object. Forgetting the parentheses after method names when calling methods. Sometimes that's a parameter is expected and you don't enter the right number of parameters. It says forgetting to give the right, it's the very next one, the next, forgetting to give the right parameters in the correct order as well. And forgetting to save, print, or use the return value from a method. Okay, knowing that math.pow, right? Pow, I believe, gives you a double, right? So making sure we have the correct return value. If we want that as an int, we need to cast it as an int. The double equals to symbol to test if two strings are equal. Instead, we should be using the dot equals method or the compare to method. Okay, if we're comparing numbers or comparing Boolean values, ints, doubles, we can use a double equals to, but we cannot use it for strings. Okay, uppercase and lowercase characters are different in Java. They're not the same. So when you're comparing two strings, we need to make sure that we understand that. It says thinking that substrings include the character at the last index when they don't. Thinking that strings can change when they can't. We've already talked about them being immutable. And it says trying to call a method like dot index of with a string reference. If str1 is null, you'll get a null pointer exception. All right, and we're going to practice some of these here in the next lesson. But that's the summary of Unit 2, 2.10, Unit 2 summary.